Okay, so today I have the pleasure of talking with Alex Nye from Tokyo, Japan. Alex, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. Could you just start by telling us a bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, James. Yeah, so I'm based in Tokyo now, and yeah, I'm a New Yorker. I came from grew up, born and raised in New York, and moved to Japan 17 years ago. And right now, I'm basically helping Japanese companies expand overseas. So I think that's how we connected on the communication side of things. That a lot of people in Japan have only communicated with, other people domestically. And when they're going abroad, they need to learn obviously a new language, and that comes along with a lot of different kind of communication skills, different cultural understandings, and all of that I kind of package together and help them do that.
That's right, because you and I approach a very similar problem, but from different ends of the spectrum, really.
That's right. That's right.
I'm trying to help native English speakers communicate more clearly with people who speak English as a second language and to do business, let's say, in Japan successfully. And you're
Mhm,
going the
mhm,
other way
mhm.
around. You're helping native Japanese speakers communicate and do business with, amongst others, native English speakers. So we've got the same idea, but from different approaches, basically. What are the main challenges for people in Japan doing business with, let's say, Westerners or English speakers from the UK or America?
Well, that's a really good point because what you do is helping me do my job actually. Because when I introduce them to overseas clients or people, in the West, and of course, English is the main language of communication. A lot of times, it goes the other way. A lot of British people, American people, Australians, they've only communicated with other people around them, and that comes with all their own local colloquialisms, their own slang, all of their accents, you know, can be pretty harsh sometimes. And when they go into those meetings, the both sides are not going to understand each other at all. Even though they might both be speaking English, you know, having a super native, super local person speaking to somebody who might not even be a mid-level, English as a second language speaker, like there's this huge communication gaps that I often have to sit in the middle and kind of interpret English to English, which is kind of weird. But yeah, like there's all kinds of challenges on both sides of that, and I'm American and I've lived in here almost half my life, so I'm pretty confident. But what I want to do is really spread that out so I don't have to be involved all the time, and you doing your job and hopefully me, leaving some kind of impact here is, we can kind of approach some kind of global, universal understanding level or something. I feel like that's kind of what we're both aiming towards, but from different angles.
Yeah, I think you're right because English is clearly a lingua franca, so it's spoken so
Hmm.
widely across the world. But it's interesting what you say about being a translator because you're talking about translating English into English, which
Right,
is
right.
actually intuitive. What are some of the specific sort of problems that require you to be there to translate between an American speaking English and a Japanese person speaking English?
Well, this gets into the language itself too, right? So English is what they call a low context language, and Japanese is a very high context language, right? So low context meaning what I say is what I mean, and me being a New Yorker, usually that's exactly what I'm saying. I like to be honest and direct with people, but Japanese is a polar opposite where you need to read between the lines and extract the meaning from that. So that includes all of these other nonverbal cues and environmental cues, relationship cues, and when somebody says something to you in Japanese, it might mean something else than the literal meaning, and it oftentimes is that case. So then things get complicated when they bring that whole mentality or that whole cultural aspect into English, and they try to speak English the same way they would speak Japanese. So I've gotten burned so many times myself when I do business with a Japanese partner or a potential Japanese client, and I'll ask them, so is it possible for us to do business again? And they'll say, yeah, there's a chance, right? But I'll be strung along for a year or so until I realized, like, oh, what they meant was actually no, but they couldn't tell me no. But I was supposed to interpret that meant no. But maybe we can do it together is their way of, saying, what is it? That high context mentality into English, which is not something we're used to. So that's also something I have to kind of navigate when I'm kind of bridging the cultures.
It seems to me very difficult for somebody to move from a low context communication culture like mine being in the UK, where it's fairly straightforward and direct and there's no implied meaning. It seems very hard to move from that to a high context culture, particularly when transmitting information. I was thinking this the other day, it might be easy enough, not easy. It seems easier to ask somebody to interpret nuanced communication. So this person said that to me. What did they actually mean? What should I be aware of? That's one thing. But for me to move from a very direct communication style to an indirect communication style, I think it's incredibly difficult for a British person or an American person to do that.
Oh yeah, I mean, there was definitely a learning curve, many times where I only learned these words only like 1 or 2 years ago too. I had no idea this whole high context, low context, direct, indirect thing even existed. Like, and when I finally read about it, I was like, oh, that's what it was this whole time. Because for 10, 15 years, I was just like, okay, this is the Japanese way, this is the American way. We just have to be careful and try to assume that what they say is not what they mean. But I had no idea there was actually, academic term for these things until recently. In my house, my kids are bilingual, like 100% bilingual, because our rule is basically I will speak English, and then my wife will speak Japanese to the kids. And when we were dating, that's how we always communicated anyway, which was kind of confusing to a lot of people. That I would speak to my wife in English because it's just more natural for me, and she understands English, so she'll just respond to me in Japanese, and I understand the Japanese, and it's just more natural for us to communicate in our native languages. And when we had kids, we just continued doing that, and magically it worked out that I guess they're smart enough to figure out, 2 languages, but it's surprisingly effective, I guess. Yeah.
It sounds like a very interesting way of communicating. Do you communicate the same things in each language? I'm thinking of your kids in particular. There's an interesting book, and I cannot remember the name of the lady who wrote it. But basically, she did some research and found out that with bilingual couples, in many cases, everyday conversations were conducted, let's say in Spanish. If they both speak Spanish and English, they would talk Spanish to each other at home. But when they had an argument, when they had a fight, that was done in English. Perhaps it's direct. I don't know. Do you have anything similar in your household in the way that you switch?
Oh yeah, I 100%. That I made the connection just a couple of weeks ago. I wasn't involved with anything. I was just walking past, and my wife and daughter were having an argument about something, and it was all in English. And I was like, I didn't think anything of it, right? I was like, okay, whatever. And I don't know, walked past and did some laundry or something. Then I came back. I passed by again, and they were also making up in English. And then I clicked in my mind. I was like, oh my God, like, yeah, they use that direct language for the emotional times, I guess, because it's in their abilities to use that language, and for them to communicate that way, I guess, is more fitting, more natural, in that circumstance. And honestly, I was jealous because I can only use English, but they have the option to switch, depending on which language is more appropriate or more fitting for the situation.
When you were
learning
Japanese, you say you learned it by a process of osmosis. What, if anything, did you find helped you from the perspective of native Japanese speakers? Was there anything that they did or anything in terms of the way they spoke or defined words that you found particularly helpful to help you learn and communicate?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say, yeah, being able to speak. So, okay, Japanese differs from English in the formality side of things. English formality, yeah, we'll use it if we're speaking to, I don't know, like somebody we really respect, or maybe in journalism there's a way to speak, or maybe when you're young, how you speak to your teachers, or all of that. Like, but it's not as, how can I say, deep in the. I don't know. Maybe for me as an American or as a New Yorker, like I'll very quickly switch to casual, right? Maybe I'll start the first 5 minutes of a meeting in informal, and then I'll just switch to casual English, like basically like how I'm speaking now. But Japanese has so many levels of formality in the speech, and for whatever reason, the textbooks always teach the language from a pretty high level of formality. And me having never studied that or ever needing that, honestly, like when I meet like a lot of Japanese people, they out of respect and out of kind of default way, they'll start at a pretty high formality level, and I cannot understand that, right? So for people who have the ability to recognize that learners might not know that level, that for them to switch and adapt and bring their language down to like a very simple version of Japanese, that helps me so much. And and it's an interesting point that I've kind of come across too, is only Japanese people who have international experience can do that. Like, I'll go into the like deep country somewhere, and I'll stay at some local inn, and these people have very rarely met non-Japanese people, and when they speak to me, it's in this very formal language that if it was my wife, so like what we were saying in the beginning, that I often translate English to English, like my wife will translate Japanese to Japanese for me, right? And it's weird. Like it's yeah, a concept that I guess, yeah, if you haven't met non-native people, you wouldn't even think about that. And yeah, for people who I've met along the way who have been able to make those adjustments, that's helped me a lot, actually.
It's a really interesting concept there, that language isn't just one entity, and that actually it takes a lot of skill to adapt and you talk about Japanese people, but to adapt Japanese to speak in a way which is appropriate for the intended audience. And actually almost, I think what you're saying almost goes against the natural, or at least the learned culture of speech. Because to come down several levels of formality to change the register linguistically, it's kind of wrong. For the people doing that, it is almost against everything they've learned and been taught linguistically, and in terms of politeness and formality. Perhaps, I'm guessing, speaking to you in a way which is almost inappropriate in the sense that it's too formal, but recognizing that for your communication needs, that's the best thing that they can do. That's quite a leap of empathy and skill, really, to communicate in that way.
Yeah, exactly right. You're exactly right. Like that, it's deeply tied into the culture of how you're supposed to communicate with people and show your respect in those ways, and the familiarity level between you and the speaker plays a lot into what level of register that they're supposed to use. And yeah, exactly.
I know you spend a lot of time advising Japanese companies on how to market and do business to the societies from the West, the UK and US in particular. What's some of the main advice that you give to people in Japan in how to do that?
I talk about empathy a lot.
2 minutes soundbite. That's quite a challenge. I'm sorry, but
no. It's good. You know, like you're talking. Like I'm trying to think a high level to bring it down to simple, right? You know, we'll do it for the business side. Yeah. I talk about empathy a lot. So, you know, in one example, like I was giving. So I also help. You know, because Japan is a pretty popular tourist destination, I think. Like it's high on many people's lists of, you know, bucket list or whatever, to come to Japan once in their life, you know, to see, you know, either Kyoto, Tokyo, Osaka, like, you know, there's all these famous, you know, I don't know, a lot of reasons to come to visit Japan. And I help, well, one of my clients is in fashion. So they receive lots of, you know, inbound tourists coming to their shops in the major cities around Japan. And I give them very simple English training. You know, it's like, you know, hi, welcome to the shop. You know, my name is da da da. Let me know if you need anything. You know, things like that, right? And then I just, at the end of one session, just a couple of weeks ago, I asked the students, the staff members, like, did you ever think about what the tourist feels? Did you ever put yourself in their shoes? And I was actually shocked and a little bit sad that they never thought about that, right? They were just doing things from their side. And then I did just a very quick exercise, like just listing out the emotions or feelings of how you feel when you travel to another country, right? And when you try to go shopping in another country. And, you know, that exercise actually, you could see, like, really open their eyes, like, oh my God, like, you know, this is my country, but, you know, when somebody else comes to visit, they don't see or interpret things the way we do. You know, it might be their first time in Asia, it might be their first time, you know, whatever, traveling ever on the airplane. And, you know, we have to put that into, you know, how they, communicate and how they sell and how they build these relationships with new people from abroad.
And I think that's the case for a lot of native English speakers too. In my line of work, we have the advantage of being able to go virtually anywhere in the world and speak English, and at least think we're being understood, even if some of the nuances and complexities are missed. And most of us are monolingual, so we don't naturally empathize with what it's like to just learn and to communicate and study or shop or travel using a second language. For myself, I know we were talking about this last time. I was really surprised that the hardest place in the world for me to communicate was New York. Of all places. So I'm British, I speak English. I mean, New York, people there speak English.
My people.
And I could not understand them, and they could not understand me. And I found that absolutely incredible. I remember going on to the subway, as it's called, not the underground, which is what I would call it. Trying to buy tickets to go to a particular place in New York. And I found it so difficult. I ended up changing my destination that I couldn't find now.
Just give me a ticket anywhere.
Yeah, I think I remember I wanted to go to the Bronx and just have a look around there because I heard of it and seen it on TV. I thought I want to say I've been there. And I was asking the guy in the ticket office, how do I get there? Which ticket do I need? What's the route? 5 minutes later, no, couldn't get it. And in the end, I spent the whole week in Manhattan, which was great. I
Wow.
like Manhattan, but that's the only New York I was able to travel around. And that was mostly because I was able to walk rather than try to use
Okay.
the subway again. So I found that the communication differences between native English speakers almost insurmountable in some cases. So I think it's even more when you've got a second language thrown in.
Oh, that's a really good point. And I don't. Yeah, that's a funny thing about New Yorkers is I have traveled pretty a lot in a lot more than most New Yorkers, I think. And the really weird thing for me is I never meet another New Yorker when I'm traveling. I'll meet British people anywhere. I'll meet Australian people anywhere. I'll meet Canadians. I'll meet like Swiss people everywhere. But I rarely meet other Americans, first of all. And then I've literally never met another New Yorker on my travels. And I think, you know, New York is a big city and it has a lot going for it, obviously. But it's not the whole world. And I think a lot of people who grow up there kind of think everything is there. And or everybody wants to go to New York, so why do I need to go visit other places? And I would encourage people from no matter where you are, but maybe especially New York, to travel a little more. Because I think what you're saying is, a lot of just the local accent or our way of speaking is, even me now, I'm not even using that accent, right? And like this is part of my whole globalized, I don't know, mentality now. Is when I came here, actually, I realized I couldn't speak to anybody if I was using my regular accent. Yeah, it frustrates me a lot that New Yorkers, especially New Yorkers, like for whatever reason, just cannot communicate anywhere else. And oh yeah, this is what I want to talk. Like yeah, but in the month of October, my parents, who are New Yorkers, came to stay with me for that month. And as one of the kind of, I don't know, strange or kind of funny business ideas I had was I brought them to that fashion client I was talking to you about. I actually brought them to the office and I wanted to get feedback on, the next season's lineup of products. And I put my parents in this like product planning meeting, right? I threw both sides into the deep end here, right? It's like a pure like there's 8 Japanese people in there, and then like my parents, and then like me on the side, and I really wish I took a picture, but the people in that group, the Japanese people, the Japanese side of that, quite a few of them have pretty high level of English fluency, and I think 2 of them have actually lived abroad, and they don't really have too many challenges with English. But my parents, being New Yorkers, went into that meeting speaking like New Yorkers. And I was translating the whole time, English to English. And it just frustrated me so much that like, why can't you understand, or why can't you see that these people don't understand you, right? But they understand me, right? And in this version of English. But when they were speaking native New Yorker, nobody understood that. And it was, just really frustrating that they didn't have that awareness in them. And I've noticed that a lot when they come to visit, or when my sisters come to visit, like they have just one way of speaking, I guess. And I was hoping that, in talking about empathy or just caring communication, that they would try to adjust to non-native speakers, or even like not even fluent people, but like a lot of people have almost zero level of English, but they still communicate as if those people are native New Yorkers. And that gap in communication is something that I really respect you to try to kind of bridge that gap for people, because it's definitely necessary and needed. And
I think it's quite a big gap, and it's also quite an expensive one, because if communication breaks down, basically the bottom line, to use an idiom, companies can lose an awful lot of money. And as you were sharing, if people haven't got the awareness or the empathy, not because they're bad people, but because they haven't been exposed to what it's like, then how would they know that there's a need to adjust? So that's the first stage. It's having the empathy and the awareness. And then the second stage is, well, how do I do it? What word should I avoid? What word should I rephrase? How fast should I speak? And they're fairly simple techniques. But you need to be aware of them and then implement them when you're communicating. And it takes you out of a job, because you wouldn't need someone there to translate English to English, as you were saying. So.
I'm happy to give up that job. I mean, exactly. They're not bad people, and they don't mean. I guess that goes back to adjusting register as well. That my parents took it as kind of a real business meeting, which it was, but their formality and their use of, I guess, especially business idioms, nobody's going to understand that outside of New York, or even outside of America. And it was very eye-opening for me to see that they were trying to show their respect, or they were trying to provide valuable feedback, but it just wasn't coming across.
And your background, Alex, is really very, very interesting, because you didn't go in, you didn't start out as a localization expert or a business expert.
Oh, no way. No.
Colourful career path. Would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So I came to Japan in 2006 as a DJ. And I didn't really have a big plan, honestly. I came here with dreams, and I was 22 years old, and I just graduated from university, and I at the time I was just DJing on campus, and I went to school in Boston, so I was doing club events, and I don't know why, but for whatever reason, a lot of Japanese students found my party, and they weren't even from my own college. They were just, I don't know, around. They were studying at other colleges, and somehow they found my parties. And when we were getting close to graduation time, everybody's asking what jobs you want to do, what industry you're going for, who you're applying to. And I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I always thought, worst case, I can go back to, pursuing, my degree, or a job that hired based on my degree. But I was young. I had no obligations. I had nothing. And all my Japanese friends said, "Oh, if you want to continue doing what you're doing, why don't you try it in Tokyo?" And I said, "Hey, why not?" And 17 years later, I'm still here.
Absolute pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you very much for your time. And
thank you, James. It's been great.
Thank you.